Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching.
The callotide came out of FTL wrong. No deceleration burn, no proximity alert. One moment, the tunnel of compressed space folded around the hole the way it always did. That particular blue-white that experienced travelers stopped noticing after the third or fourth jump. And then it was gone. The ship dropped into real space, like something had cut the line holding it. Emergency lighting replaced the cabin overheads. Red. The kind of red that meant the ship's systems were making decisions without consulting anyone. In the troop bay, 43 conscripts grabbed whatever was bolted down. The artificial gravity stuttered. 1 full second of weightlessness, loose equipment floating, a man's water canteen rising slowly past his face like it had somewhere better to be. And then gravity remembered itself and slammed back. Someone hit the deck hard. Someone else was sick against the bulkhead. The smell of recycled air mixed with something chemical and sharp from the wall panels. Ren was already on his feet. He had been asleep in the narrow fold seat at the bay's aft end, back against the hull, arms crossed over his chest. He came awake the way infantry came awake. Completely, instantly. No soft edge between sleep and function. His boots found the deck. His hand found the support rail. He looked at the bay and cataloged threats before he cataloged people. Structural integrity. Holding. Gravity. Restored. Hull breach indicators above the bay door. Dark. No breach. No casualties yet. The intercom crackled. The navigation AI spoke in the tone it reserved for all information equally. Flat. Indifferent to what it was actually saying. Positional fix confirmed. Current location. Keth-Uvar system. Planetary body designated Keth-Uvar. Bearing 27 Mark IV. Distance 11,000 kilometers. Classification. Desert. Class 9. Hostile. Restricted zone. Atmosphere breathable. Long-term exposure risk. Rated severe. Surface temperature range 47 degrees. Positive to 18 degrees negative. Cycle dependent. Apex fauna present. Threat rating unquantified. No authorized traffic. No salvage rights. No rescue obligation. The AI paused. In the troop bay, nobody moved. The canteen that had been floating was now rolling slowly across the deck in the silence. Then it resumed. Gravitational influence of planetary body now affecting vessel trajectory. Recommend immediate corrective burn. Someone near the middle of the bay said, "Where is that?" Nobody answered him. Ren moved to the small reinforced porthole set into the bay's forward bulkhead. 11,000 kilometers was close enough to see the planet without magnification. A dark red mass against the black, lit along one edge by the system's distant star. It looked like a wound, like something that had been burning for a very long time and had given up on finishing. The surface from this distance was featureless, flat, without any quality that suggested it had ever tolerated anything living on it. He had never heard of Keth-Uvar. That was not remarkable. There were thousands of designated worlds, and he was a staff sergeant on a labor transport, not a navigator. But he understood Class 9 hostile. He understood restricted zone. He understood no rescue obligation with particular clarity. He was still looking at the planet when the orbital grid activated. There was no visible discharge, no beam of light crossing the dark between the grid and the ship. The first sign was sound, a resonance moving through the hull plating as if the entire ship had been struck by something vast and was still ringing from the blow. A frequency that was felt in the chest before it was heard with the ears. Then the lights cut. All of them. Red emergency lighting included. 2 full seconds of absolute darkness. Then the hull came apart. Not a puncture. Not one clean breach. The section of forward hull simply separated at its structural seams, panels pulling away from each other, as if the fasteners holding them had simultaneously decided their function was complete. Atmosphere tore out through the gaps. The sound of it was enormous, and then immediately gone as the emergency bulkheads dropped between sections. Ren heard them slam in sequence through the ship, 3 of them, boom, 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 moving aft. And then the troop bay was sealed, and the ship beyond the bulkheads was already finished. The AI's voice came back, distorted now, something broken in the line between it and the speakers. Hull integrity compromised, multiple sections, life support. It stopped, did not finish the sentence, did not finish anything. The callow tide began to fall. What came next, Ren remembered in the way extreme violence was always remembered, not as sequence, not as narrative, as fragments without connective tissue between them. The bay tilting past 45 degrees, gravity and the planet pulling in different directions, and the planet winning. Equipment tearing free of magnetic mounts and crossing the bay horizontally. A man's scream, sharp, and then cut off with a finality that required no explanation. The emergency restraint harnesses deploying from the seat rigs, some of them, the ones that still had power, not all of them, and the sound of people in the dark scrambling for anything that was attached to anything else. He found a harness, locked it across his chest, pressed his back against the hull behind him, and closed his eyes, and did the only available thing, which was to be alive at the end of this, and deal with what came after, when it came. The atmosphere hit the hull, and the temperature spiked. Metal groaned in long, deep registers. The spin started slow and built, the emergency descent system fighting it with whatever power remained, losing, compensating, losing again. A scourline ridge caught the underside of the ship, and the impact was not a sound, but a sensation that moved through every bone simultaneously. The bay inverted briefly, then corrected. Then the hardpan came up, and it came up fast. And the last thing Ren processed before impact was that the emergency lighting had come back on. Red. And in the red light, he could see the faces of the people in the bay who had found harnesses, and they all looked the same. Then the hardpan. The heat pulled him back. Not the heat of the crash. Metal cooling. That dry electrical smell of burned systems. The heat of Keth-Uvar itself. 47 degrees, and a dryness that was almost a physical presence, a weight against the skin, pulling moisture from exposed surfaces with quiet efficiency. He registered it the way he registered pain, cataloged, filed, not acted on yet. He came out through a gap in the bay wall where the hull had peeled back along a stress fracture on impact. He stood on iron-red hardpan under a sky going dark at its edges, the star maybe 2 hours above the western horizon and dropping. The light it cast was low and flat and turned everything the color of old blood. The callow tide was in 3 main sections. Debris spread across the hardpan behind him in a long scar. None of it was going to be a ship again. None of it was going to be anything again, except salvage. He stood in the heat for 4 seconds, looked east, saw the scour lines, canyon formations cutting through the hardpan maybe 2 kilometers out, their ridges catching the dying light along their upper edges. He looked at the ground between here and there, saw the scoring in the hardpan surface, 4-point pattern, parallel, deep. Something heavy, something with claws, recent. He filed it, turned back to the wreckage and went to work. He did not call out for survivors. Sound carried on flat open terrain in ways that were not always useful. He moved through the debris field section by section, methodical, pulling people clear, assessing damage with his hands and eyes, making decisions without announcing them. 2 men he reached were past deciding anything about. He moved on without ceremony. There was no time, and ceremony cost water. He found Okori in the forward section, a gash above his ear painting the left side of his face dark, trying to shift a collapsed support beam off a man pinned beneath it, using only his own mass and anger. Ren got under the beam with him. They moved it. The man underneath had been dead for several minutes. Okori looked at him for a moment, with something that was not grief exactly, but was in the same neighborhood. Ren was already moving to the next section, and after a beat, Okori followed. Fall was upright in the aft cargo space, picking through salvage with careful hands, already running inventory in his head and reciting it quietly to himself. Water canisters, weapons cases, charge packs, medical kit. He tracked everything he touched with the precision of a man who had spent years cataloging things other people considered unimportant. Ren listened for 30 seconds, reorganized the priorities without explanation, and Fayal adjusted his recitation without argument or question. Breck was found in the compressed remains of the ship's medical bay, working by the light of a handheld torch jammed between two bent panels, treating a man with equipment shaken loose across the floor around him. He did not look up when Ren stepped over the debris to reach him. "You a medic?" Ren said. "Was," Breck said. His hands did not stop moving. "Keep pressure on that." The last part aimed at the man on the floor, not at Ren. Ren left him to it. At the edge of the debris field, he stopped, pressed 2 fingers against the old scar on his left forearm. An unconscious thing, the way some men touched a lucky charm or checked a watch that had stopped working. He looked east at the scour lines, and he looked at the sky above the scour lines going from dark red to something darker. Then he looked at something else. At the crash site's edge, where the Callow Tide's emergency systems had discharged in a final dying sequence. A full electrical dump through the hull, every remaining charge releasing at once. One of the shimmer things had stumbled. He had seen it in the minutes after impact, half-conscious himself, watching through the gap in the bay wall. 7 figures at the edge of visibility, moving toward the wreckage in a formation that was too precise to be coincidence, too coordinated to be individual. They moved like one thing operating 7 bodies, except the one closest to the discharge point. That one had stopped, lost the thread of the formation for a handful of seconds, moved wrong, then recovered and rejoined. He had not known what it meant at the time. He filed it anyway. That was the habit. File everything. Sort it later. He thought he knew what it meant now. He turned back to the survivors, and he pointed east, and he started walking. No speech, no explanation of where or why. He pointed and walked, and the ones who were going to follow him followed him, and the ones who needed a moment took their moment and then followed too. Every one of them followed. Whatever they were before the Callow Tide, miners, debtors, contract workers, men who had made bad decisions in systems that did not forgive bad decisions. They knew what a man who had somewhere to be looked like, and they fell in behind him. Okori came up on his left without being asked, the salvaged rotary cannon's tripod across both shoulders, the weight of it nothing to him or nothing he was willing to show. Faal dropped to the rear of the column. Breck moved in the middle, still working on his patient as they walked, one hand on the man's arm to steady him. The hardpan was flat and gave nothing. No cover, no shade. The star too low to cast useful shadow, even if shade had been the priority. What it offered was sight lines, which cut both ways. Ren saw the shimmer at 40 meters. Not heat distortion. The star was too low, and the temperature was already dropping with the speed that Keth-Uvar apparently considered normal. This was different. A section of hardpan that moved wrong. 6, 7 distinct displacement points arranged across their path in a loose arc, patient and still, already in position before the column had closed half the distance to the scour lines. He did not stop walking. Stopping told them he had seen. He kept his pace and said one word to Okori beside him, quiet, without looking at him. Left. Okori did not ask why. The column shifted left. The shimmer shifted with them. Then the nets came up. Launched from the ground on thin filament lines, invisible until the last angle of the dying star caught them and turned them briefly, terribly bright. They went up and out in two overlapping arcs across the column's path. Two people walked into them before the warning could reach them. Before there was a warning, before anyone understood what they were seeing. The filaments were razor-edged, and the heat signature of a living body triggered the constriction mechanism, and what happened next was fast, and the screaming was short, and that was the worst part, how short it was. Ren had the fragmentation charge in his hand, one of the flagged ones. He had specifically pulled one of the flagged ones from the salvage pack because a clean, reliable detonation was not what he needed. He armed it and threw it, not at the shimmer points, but at the hardpan between them, slightly left of center, where the displacement pattern suggested the highest density of units. The detonation was wrong. The charge was flagged for good reason. The yield was uneven, the blast radius ragged on one side, the concussive wave asymmetric. None of that mattered. What mattered was that the wave moved through the hardpan and the 7 shimmer things stopped. Not destroyed. Stopped. The way a transmission stops when the signal is interrupted. The perfect coordination between them went out like a light, and for 4 seconds, maybe 5, they were separate things standing on hardpan, moving with the uncertainty of individuals who had forgotten how to be individuals. Ren was already through the gap. Move! They moved, through the break in the arc, past what the nets had left behind, across the last open ground. The Moor sect did not pursue immediately. When they began to move again, it was slow, tentative, the coordination returning in pieces. By the time it had fully returned, the scour line canyon mouth was right there, and Ren walked his people into it as full dark took the sky. The canyon walls rose on both sides, red rock, layered, carved by something that had stopped flowing here long before anything now alive had been born. The floor was loose shale over hardpan, narrow, 15 meters across at its widest. The temperature had already dropped 12 degrees since they left the crash site, and was continuing down with the steady commitment of a planet that had no interest in moderation. Behind them, open hardpan. The Moor sect somewhere on it, regrouping, their bioluminescent clusters pulsing faintly in the dark like cold, distant stars. Ahead, darkness. The canyon bending south after 30 meters, whatever was beyond the bend invisible. File came up quietly beside Ren and did not say anything. He was looking up. Ren looked up. The canyon rim, 6 meters above, was occupied. Low shapes against the rock, spread along both sides of the rim in a loose line that tracked the column's position, with the patience of things that had been waiting here long before the humans arrived and expected to be waiting here long after. Matte red-brown against red stone. Almost nothing. Almost invisible. Almost. Not the same. These hadn't set traps. These waited. The heat-sensing organs along the jaw ridges were oriented down, every one of them. Nobody in the column spoke. The only sound was boots on shale and the slow, patient repositioning of large bodies above them, keeping pace, neither rushing nor falling behind. Ren pressed 2 fingers to his forearm. The Moor sect held the hardpan and the canyon mouth. The Keth held the rim and anything that tried to climb out. The canyon bent south ahead, and whatever was around that bend was unknown. He looked at the darkness ahead. He looked at it for a long time. "Move," he said. Deeper. They moved. They did not stop moving until the canyon walls closed to 4 meters across. Ren found the narrowing by feel as much as sight. The darkness was total. No star reached down here, and he moved with one hand, trailing the canyon wall, reading the rock through his fingertips. When the walls came in close enough that he could touch both sides simultaneously without fully extending his arms, he stopped. The column compressed behind him, bodies close, breathing audible. He listened. The Keth above them had stopped moving when the column stopped. He could not see them on the rim. He could hear the occasional shift of weight on rock, something large redistributing itself, and then silence again. They were still there, still tracking, still waiting on whatever internal calculus determined when a new smell became something worth the commitment of an attack. He put his back against the narrowing and faced the column. In the dark, he could see almost nothing. Shapes, proximity, the occasional pale gleam of eyes catching some fraction of light from somewhere. He kept his voice at the level of a man speaking to the person directly in front of him. 2 on watch, everyone else down. No fires, no heat sources you can avoid. If you need to move, move slow. That was all. He took the first watch himself and put Fall on the other end of the narrowing, and the rest of them found the canyon floor, and the night settled over them like something with weight. It was a bad night. The temperature dropped to its floor within 2 hours and stayed there. 18 below standard, which on Keth-Uvar meant the kind of cold that did not feel dramatic, just relentless. It found the gaps in clothing and worked at them patiently. 3 people had lost equipment in the crash or the retreat across the hardpan. They pressed together for warmth in the narrowing, and that helped and didn't help enough. By the time the sky above the canyon rim began to shift from black to deep red, Ren had cataloged 2 people who were moving wrong. Stiff, slow, the particular economy of bodies that had spent too much energy just staying alive through the dark. Not dead, not incapacitated, but the margin was narrower than it had been, and it would keep narrowing. He watched the rim as the light built. The Keth were still up there. He could see them now, the matte red-brown shapes against the rock, low and patient, jaw ridges oriented down. 4 of them on the south rim, at least 2 on the north. The Alpha somewhere he could not place, which bothered him more than the ones he could see. The light kept building. The star came up behind the eastern scour lines, and the temperature began its climb. Slower going up than it had come down, but steady, committed. The Kith shifted, not all at once. One moved first, pulling back from the rim edge, and then another, and then the rest following in the unhurried way of things that were not retreating, but simply going somewhere more sensible. Within 20 minutes, the rim was empty. Ren had suspected this from what he had seen, the way they had appeared at dusk and tracked through the dark. Dawn hunters and dusk hunters both meant the peak heat between was dead time for them too. Now, he had confirmation. He looked at the canyon ahead of them. He found File at the north end of the narrowing, crouched against the wall, watching the canyon bend 50 meters ahead. "Scout forward," Ren said. "That bend, and whatever is past it. You are looking for a position. Walls close, overhead cover. More than one exit if possible. Take nothing that makes noise." "How far?" File said. "Until you find something, or until the heat gets bad. Then come back." Fall was gone in under a minute. No fuss. No questions about what happened if the something he found was not what they needed. While Fall was forward, Ren sat with Breck at the back of the narrowing, and they spoke quietly about the 2 cold-damaged people and about Okori. Okori was upright against the canyon wall 3 meters away, the rotary cannon's tripod across his knees, pretending to be interested in something on the rock face opposite him. The pressure burst had caught him across the left side during the break through the Moor-Sect arc. A partial hit, not full contact, because if it had been full contact, the conversation about Okori would already be over. What it had done instead was cause internal bleeding that Breck had assessed by touch and expression, and the specific way Okori had stopped breathing normally. "Manageable," Breck said. His voice had the particular flatness of a man being precise about something he found unacceptable. For now, he needs to not take another hit on that side. He needs to not exert past a certain point. He needs things I do not have. Ren looked at Okori across the narrowing. "Does he know?" Ren asked. "He worked it out himself," Breck said, "about an hour ago." Ren nodded, looked at the canyon floor between his boots for a moment, then stood. Across the narrowing, Okori had not moved, still looking at the rock face, still holding the tripod across his knees like it was the most natural thing. Ren left him to it. Fall came back an hour before mid-morning. "There's a branch canyon," he said. "South running, narrower than this. 40 meters in there is a formation. The walls lean together overhead, almost touching. Not a cave. Cover. Shadow all day. 2 approaches, both narrow enough to hold with 1 gun each." Ren said nothing for a moment. "Moor-Sect sign," he said. "Anything?" "Nothing fresh," Fall said. "Old scoring on the rock. Something with outer limbs, high up on the walls. Maybe a scouting pass. Not recent." Ren looked east toward the canyon mouth they had come through the night before, the opening back onto the hardpan. It was 2 kilometers away. He could not see it from here. "They are coming in," Ren said. Not a question. Fall understood it was not a question. "Then we move before they do." Ren nodded. They reached the branch canyon and the rock formation as the heat peaked. The walls leaning together overhead cut the direct sun completely, and the temperature in the formation's shadow was 15 degrees below the open hardpan. Still brutal, but survivable. The 2 approach channels were exactly as Fall had described. Narrow. Defensible. Ren set the rotary cannon at the primary approach on its tripod and put Okori behind it. Okori said nothing. They both knew what it meant. Behind the gun, Okori didn't have to move. Then Ren went to the secondary approach alone, and he sat and he looked back down the branch canyon toward the main canyon run, and he thought about the Moor-Sect. He thought about the way they had been buried in the hardpan before the nets went up. Patient, already in position. They had not reacted to the humans. They had prepared for them. That was the behavior of something that modeled other organisms and acted on the model before direct contact. He thought about the disrupted cord after the fragmentation charge, the units separating, losing formation, moving with individual uncertainty as the signal failed across all of them from a single point of interruption. He remembered how they had moved differently at the canyon mouth in the early morning, the spacing wider between units, the formation looser. Not guesswork, not imitation of human tactics. A network distributing its load differently to maintain cohesion when the original tight spacing had proven vulnerable. The same problem solved at the level of the system, not the individual. They were going to be harder to disrupt now. The same trick would not produce the same result. The Moor-Sect cord entered the main canyon 2 hours before dusk. Faal saw them first from the branch canyon mouth. 7 units moving in the new formation, wider spaced, the bioluminescent clusters on their upper torsos pulsing at a frequency that looked different from the night before. Slower, more controlled, like a network running careful rather than fast. He came back to Ren without sound. 7, he said. Main canyon, moving toward us. How far apart? Ren said. Fayal held his hands up. 8, 10 meters between units. Ren nodded. That spacing meant the concussive disruption radius of a single charge would not reach all of them. 2, maybe 3 units affected while the others maintained sync and kept the cord partially functional. Not enough of a window. He looked at the canyon walls around them, looked up at the rim, still empty. The Keth gone from the heat, not yet returned. He looked at the 2 remaining fragmentation charges he had set at the primary approach, and he looked at the rotary cannon on its tripod, and he looked at Okori behind it. Then he looked at the branch canyon mouth and the main canyon beyond it, and he started to see it. Not a fight. A sequence. The Moor sect were moving through the main canyon toward the branch. They would reach the branch mouth in under an hour. In under 2 hours, the heat would break, and the Keth would return to the canyon rim. The Moor sect knew this. They were moving in daylight precisely to avoid the Keth window. They intended to be through the canyon and onto the humans before dusk, force them back. They were right about the timing. They were wrong about what the timing meant. Ren pulled Fal close. The charges, he said. Not at the Moor sect. At the canyon walls above the main canyon, 50 meters back from the branch mouth. Both of them. I want noise and debris, and I want it loud enough to feel through the rock. Fal looked at him. You want the Keth to hear it. I want the Keth to feel it, Ren said. Through their feet, through the walls they are sitting against, up on the rim, waiting for the heat to break. Fal looked at the canyon rim above them, empty still, the light going amber at its edges. The Moor sect will be right underneath, Fal said. Yes, Ren said. It did not go cleanly. Nothing on Keth-Uvar went cleanly. Fal placed the charges, and Ren pulled the column back into the rock formation, and Okori swung the rotary cannon to cover the branch mouth, and they waited. The heat was breaking, the amber in the light deepening toward red. The detonations were 60 meters down the main canyon, and they were not large, but they were sharp. The concussive crack amplified by the canyon walls into something that moved through the rock as much as the air. Ren felt it in his boots, felt it in his back through the wall he was pressed against. Above them on the rim, something moved. Not one thing. Several. The Keth came down fast, not dropping, controlled descent along the canyon walls using the claw holds in the rock, 4 of them hitting the main canyon floor within seconds of each other. They did not hesitate. They did not assess. They went directly toward the nearest heat signatures in their hunting window, and the nearest heat signatures were 7 Moor sect units caught in the main canyon with the light going wrong and the timing going wrong, and no open hardpan to retreat to. What happened in the main canyon in the next 90 seconds, Ren did not watch directly. He listened to it. Everyone in the rock formation listened to it. The sounds were not anything that required imagination to interpret, and they were over faster than expected, which said something about the Keth that Ren filed for later. Then relative silence. Then one sound, a pressure burst discharge from a Moor sect unit, single from somewhere in the main canyon. Then nothing. Ren counted to 30, looked at Fayal. Fayal shook his head slightly. He could not see the main canyon from his position either. Ren looked at Okori. I will go, Okori said. No, Ren said. He said it without looking at Okori's left side. Stay on the gun. He went himself to the branch mouth, looked into the main canyon. 3 Moor sect units down and not moving. 2 more damaged. He could tell by the way the bioluminescent clusters were pulsing. Wrong rhythm, wrong brightness. the network distressed. Those two were retreating north toward the canyon mouth, moving with the uncoordinated individual gait of units that had lost significant sync. One Keth down in the canyon floor, not moving. The others gone, back up the walls or deeper into the canyon, somewhere in the dark, that was coming fast now. One more sect unit unaccounted for. Ren was back in the formation in 8 seconds. "Move," he said. "South approach. Now." He did not explain the math. He did not need to. They moved. The south approach brought them out onto a lower hardpan shelf, not the open flat they had crashed on, but a secondary level. Lower, sheltered on 3 sides by scour line ridges. Smaller. Contained. The kind of position that was defensible because it was also a trap, which was the only kind of position Keth-Uvar seemed to offer. They got everyone through. Ren took count without counting, looked at faces, registered presence, registered absence. One man had not come through the south approach. He had been at the rear of the column when the unaccounted Moor sect unit found him. The pressure burst had been for him. Nobody said anything. There was nothing to say that the silence did not already contain. Breck went to Okori without being asked, and Okori submitted to the assessment without complaint, which told Ren more about Okori's current state than anything Breck would say afterward. The rotary cannon was down, not destroyed. The housing had taken debris impact from the detonations, and the feed mechanism was jammed. Fixable, maybe, with time and the right improvisation. They had neither in abundance. Ren stood at the edge of the lower shelf and looked at the scour line ridges around them and looked at the sky going dark above them. The Moor sect had lost most of a chord. They had been hit in their timing, in their positioning, in the coordination they relied on as their fundamental advantage. They had lost units not to human weapons, but to the planet's own teeth, aimed at them by a species they had assessed as prey. That assessment was going to change. Ren knew what a reassessed enemy looked like. He had seen it in other campaigns, other terrain. The adaptation that came after the first real surprise was always more dangerous than whatever had come before. The Moor sect would not send one chord next time. They would not move through confined terrain without accounting for what lived in it. They would not underestimate the timing. He pressed 2 fingers to his forearm and looked at the people behind him on the lower shelf. How many were left? What shape they were in? What was left in their hands to fight with? Breck caught his eye from where he crouched beside Okori, gave a small, specific look that said, "He is still here, but the clock is running and I cannot stop it." Ren looked away, looked at the ridges, looked at the dark coming down. They had a position. They had bought time. They had hurt the enemy in a way the enemy had not anticipated and would not forget. Above them on the ridgeline, something moved against the last of the light. Low, patient, watching. The Keth had found them again. The bioluminescent pulses on the hardpan below the shelf were not random. Ren had been watching them since the first gray of pre-dawn, flat on his stomach at the shelf edge, chin on his forearms. 3 distinct groupings moved across the open hardpan, each composed of 7 units. Within every grouping, one pulsed differently, slower, more deliberate, and the others aligned to it, adjusting their rhythm a fraction behind, as if taking their cue from that single source. 3 chords, 3 anchors. He watched the anchors for a long moment, noting how they held slightly back from the forward edge, while the others moved in relation to them, never straying beyond a fixed distance, always angled inward toward the source frequency. He filed it, let it sit, looked at the hardpan between the Moor sect position and the shelf. Then he looked at the bodies. 2 of them lay where they had fallen during the retreat from the rock formation, at the base of the scour line ridge, where the south approach opened onto the shelf. Nobody had moved them. There had been no time and no reason. Now there was. He lay at the shelf edge, studying the bodies, the moorsect pulses on the hardpan, and the terrain between them, and the shape of it began to resolve. He pressed 2 fingers to his forearm, then he got up and went to find Fall. Breck was still working on the cannon feed mechanism when Wren came back through the shelf. He had been working on it for 3 hours with a piece of hull, stripping bent into a lever, and 2 fingers he could not fully extend from where the debris had caught them in the rock formation. He did not look up. "It will feed," Breck said. "I cannot tell you for how long." Wren crouched beside him, looked at the mechanism, looked at Breck's hands. "How many bursts?" Wren asked. "If he is careful, several. If he is not careful, 1, Breck said. They both knew who he meant. Okori was 4 meters away with his back against the shelf wall and his eyes open, watching the sky go from black to the particular deep red that preceded dawn on Keth-Uvar. His breathing was audible, not labored exactly. Just present in a way breathing was not supposed to be present. Each breath a small, deliberate act, rather than an automatic one. He had not complained. He had not asked Breck anything after the initial assessment in the canyon. He had simply sat with the cannon across his knees and watched the sky and waited to find out what came next. Wren went to him, crouched down. Okori looked at him. "I need the cannon on the primary approach," Wren said. "Controlled bursts. Short ones." "How many?" Okori said. "Enough to make them think that is where we are holding." Okori looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded. He understood the distinction. Enough to create the impression, not enough to actually hold anything. A performance with a specific duration. Wren started to stand. "After that," Okori said quietly. Wren looked at him. "After that, I'm done," Okori said. "Not a question. Not a request for reassurance. A statement of fact, delivered in the same tone he used for everything else." Wren held his eyes for a moment. Then he said, "Yes." Okori nodded, looked back at the sky. Wren left him to it. He explained the plan to Fall in the dark at the shelf edge, both of them flat on their stomachs, looking at the hardpan below. "The bodies," Wren said. "We move them into the corridor between the south ridge and the main shelf approach. Their equipment stays on them. Keep the power cells active." Fall was quiet for a moment. Then, "They will track the signal." "Yes," Wren said. "A dead man with active equipment reads the same as a living one." "Close enough," Wren said. "Signal density will read as a cluster, multiple signatures in a confined position. They will assess it as a defensive concentration, and they will commit units to it." Fall looked at the terrain below the shelf. The corridor between the south ridge and the approach was 40 meters long and 8 meters wide. The walls on both sides, sheer scour-line rock. No exits, no cover once you were in it. "And when they are in the corridor?" Fael asked. "The remaining charges," Wren said. "Both walls. Simultaneously." Fall said nothing for a moment. "They will not hesitate," Wren said. "That is the problem with something that runs on signal response. It responds. It does not doubt the signal first." Fael looked at the bodies at the base of the ridge, then at the moorsect pulses on the hardpan. "Who moves them?" Fael said. "We do," Wren said. "Now, before the light comes." They moved the bodies in darkness and silence, and Wren did not think about what he was doing in any terms beyond the mechanical. Position, angle, equipment, orientation, power cell status. Foyle worked beside him without speaking. They placed the charges in the corridor walls after. Low, angled inward. The blast radius calculated to cover the corridor floor without significant upward dispersion. Ren checked each charge by touch. Neither was flagged. Both were reliable. By the time they were back on the shelf, the sky was going red at its eastern edge. The Keth were still on the ridges. Ren could see them in the pre-dawn, the familiar low shapes, the jaw ridges oriented down. He watched them as the light built, watched the heat build with it, watched the shapes pull back from the rim edge one by one, unhurried, going somewhere cooler until the cooler time came. By full dawn, the ridges were empty. Below on the hardpan, the 3 chord groupings had stopped pulsing in the loose, scattered pattern of a unit at rest. They were moving, converging toward the shelf approaches from 2 directions, primary from the north, secondary from the east. They had used the night to map the position, and they were not probing now. The spacing between units was wider than it had been in the canyon. The network adapting, spreading itself to stay cohesive under impact. They had learned. They were coming in with everything they had learned, applied. Ren looked at the primary approach, looked at Okori behind the cannon, the tripod set, the feed mechanism holding for now. He caught Okori's eye and nodded. Okori opened up. The rotary cannon in the narrow primary approach was a different instrument than it had been on open hardpan. The walls focused the sound into something physical. Each burst a compression that hit the chest and the ears simultaneously. The first chord coming up the primary approach took the opening bursts badly. 2 units down in the first seconds. The others broke their advance and pulled back to reassess. Okori fired in the short, controlled bursts Ren had asked for. Careful. Measured. He was not holding the approach. He was making noise, making heat, making the primary approach read as the concentration point, the place where the humans were committed and dug in. It took 4 bursts. The Moorsect network read the signal density from the primary, and then read the cluster in the corridor and made its calculation. The primary was contested, costly, defended. The corridor cluster was a concentration of signatures, heat, active equipment signal, multiple readings, in a position that flanked the primary defense. Standard network logic said, commit to the flank, collapse the primary from the side. 2/3 of the available units redirected toward the corridor. Ren watched from the shelf edge. He watched the Moorsect units enter the corridor mouth, moving in their new wide formation, bioluminescent clusters, pulsing fast now, the network running hot and confident. He watched them pass the first body without slowing. The heat signature was reading correctly. The equipment signal was reading correctly. They were 8 meters in. 12. 15. He detonated both charges simultaneously. The corridor did not exist after that in any useful sense. The twin blasts from both walls met in the middle, and what they produced was not an explosion outward, but a compression inward. The scour line rock, focusing the force the same way the canyon walls had focused the cannon sound. It lasted less than 2 seconds. What it left behind was silence and dust and nothing moving in the corridor at all. On the primary approach, the remaining Moorsect units stopped. The network had lost a significant portion of its signal mass simultaneously. Not one chord disrupted. Pieces of multiple chords gone at once. The pulses Ren could see from the shelf edge went irregular, units that had been synchronized dropping into individual rhythms, the anchor nodes working to re-establish cohesion across a suddenly fragmented network. 4 seconds. 6. 8. Ren was already moving. He dropped off the shelf fast, fall beside him and 2 others behind, the one still capable of what came next. He carried the pulse rifle, and he had already marked the 3 anchor nodes during the night. He hadn't lost them. The Moorsect units on the hardpan were not helpless. They were degraded. There was a difference, and the difference mattered. A degraded Moorsect unit was still 4 arms and a pressure burst emitter and the instinct to survive. Ren moved through them the way he had moved through every dangerous environment he had ever been in, which was carefully and without stopping. The first anchor node gave itself away by its pulse, slower and more deliberate than the units around it, still trying to re-establish the cord's rhythm. It faced the corridor, focused on what had happened there, not on a single human moving in from below the shelf. Ren closed to 6 meters and shot it. The cord did not collapse. It degraded, the units losing their central frequency as their pulses broke into separate, uncoordinated patterns. They did not flee. They simply became 7 independent threats instead of 1 unified one, and independent threats could be managed. The second anchor node reacted to the first's loss and began to reposition, pulling back to widen the distance as the system correctly identified the anchor as the priority target. It moved faster than Ren expected. He had to break around a degraded unit that fired a pressure burst past his left shoulder, close enough for the concussion to brush his neck. Fall dropped that unit from 10 meters to Ren's right without slowing. Ren reached the second anchor at a run, shot it from 4 meters, and kept moving. The third had done something different. It had gone completely still, flattened against the hardpan, its bioluminescent clusters dimmed almost to nothing. It was reducing its signal, making itself harder to track by the same pattern recognition Ren had just used. Without the network, it was adapting on its own, responding as an individual to a threat that had already learned how to read the cord. Ren stopped. He looked at the hardpan. The heat shimmer was building with the morning. Still early, still manageable, but present. He looked at the area where the third anchor should be based on the last position he had tracked. Nothing. He looked at the hardpan differently, not for movement, not for heat shimmer, for the absence of it, a shape where the shimmer moved wrong, where the heat distortion had an interruption. A body-sized piece of hardpan where the air above it was slightly different from the air above empty ground. There, he walked to it and shot it from 2 meters, and the bioluminescent clusters flared once, bright, and then went dark. Around him, the remaining Morsect units moved across the hardpan without direction. They did not flee or attack. They operated without purpose, the network too fragmented to coordinate. The anchor nodes gone, each unit running on its own signal loop with nothing to answer, except the vast, indifferent heat rising off Keth-Uvar. They processed. They emitted. They waited for a signal that was not coming. Ren looked at them for a moment. Some of them moved off across the hardpan, angling toward the scour lines, where shadow would come first. Others remained where they were, going still as the heat built, reducing their output in a way that read less like choice and more like a system minimizing load under stress. No one spoke when Ren and his crew returned. Fall sat against the shelf wall and looked at the hardpan. The 2 others sat with him. Breck was beside Okori, with one hand on Okori's chest and the other in his lap, and his eyes on the middle distance, which told Ren what he needed to know before he reached them. He crouched beside Okori. Okori's eyes were open, fixed on the sky above the shelf. The cannon still stood on its tripod, the feed mechanism holding through all 4 bursts. Something else had gone before it did. The cannon was done, and so was Okori. The 2 had gone close enough together that Breck couldn't say which came first. Ren put his hand on Okori's forearm for a moment. Then he stood. He walked to the shelf edge and looked out at the hardpan. The remaining Morsect units still moved without direction, their pulses uneven as the network failed to reform. The corridor was still dust. The open ground between the shelf and the scour lines held the evidence of 3 days on Keth-Uvar, the way hardpan always did. Everything left where it fell, already settling into the surface. The Keth were back on the ridges. The heat was still climbing, not yet at peak, and they were already repositioning along the high ground, settling into the day cycle. The planet had not changed. It had not noticed the callow tide, the crash, or what followed. It would not notice when the hardpan covered it all. Ren looked at the sky. He was not looking for anything. He was doing what men did after it was over, giving his eyes somewhere to rest, while the rest of him worked through the cost, measuring it without numbers, feeling the weight of who remained behind him against the weight of who did not. That was when the ships crossed the sky. 3 of them. Military configuration, the flat angular silhouette of a search and recovery formation, running lights still active from the atmospheric entry. They came in from the north, descending in the unhurried way of vessels that had found what they were looking for and were now executing the next procedure in the sequence. Someone behind him on the shelf made a sound, not words, just sound. Ren did not move from the shelf edge. As he watched the ships cross the sky, the understanding came together without effort. The callow tide's drop would have registered as an anomaly in the jump network, something that required resolution. Someone would have mapped the possible emergent zones from the signature and worked through them in sequence, each location checked according to probability rather than urgency. This planet had been one of those points, likely the last, and the ships had come to it when the math finally brought them here. They had not been saved. They had been found. One of the ships broke from the formation and began its descent toward the shelf, the landing thrusters firing in short, precise burns, the red dust of Keth-Uvar rising around it as it came down. A ramp extended before the dust had settled. 2 figures in pressure gear came down it, moving with the efficiency of people executing a protocol. Ren watched them cross the hardpan toward the shelf. He glanced back once at what was behind him. Breck beside Okori, Faal against the wall. The others gathered where they had stopped, the cannon still fixed on its tripod. 3 days on Keth-Uvar were written there in what remained and what did not. When he looked forward again, the figures were closer. Beyond them, the last Moorsect pulses were fading into nothing, the network finally collapsing as the heat built across the open ground, the units going still where they stood. The 2 figures reached the base of the shelf and looked up at him. One of them spoke, a question, procedural, the kind used to begin a recovery. Ren heard the sound of it, but not the meaning. His attention had already moved past them, out across the hardpan, to the distant scour lines, and the flat, unbroken sky above Keth-Uvar, unchanged by anything that had happened below it. He looked down at the 2 figures. "It's done," he said. He turned and went to help carry Okori down to the ship.
Hey there, space human. I'm really curious about your thoughts on this video. Drop a quick comment and let me know what's on your mind. Or just say hi if you prefer. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Also, remember to check the pinned comment. Trust me, it's worth a look. Oh, and one last thing. I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here, or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.